Welcome to Unpacked, 5 Questions, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes of one great travel story. I'm Catherine LaGrave, a deputy editor at Afar. I'm pretty lucky. I get to brainstorm, assign, and edit features for our print magazine, and I get to work with writers who have an ear for great travel stories. Lisa Aben comes to mind. An Afar contributing writer, Lisa is based in Copenhagen and has written about everything from how climate change is transforming Greenland's landscapes and language to the people who make Marrakesh's Medina tick. Say that 3 times fast. For her newsletter, The Unplugged Traveler, she explores Europe without using the internet. But recently, Lisa visited Sicily to report on a topic that's very much set the internet ablaze: European countries selling homes for just €1. I sat down with Lisa to learn more about what captivated her about Sicily and if she came away with a €1 home herself. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for chatting with me today. We've seen so many headlines about homes selling for €1, and I was so intrigued by this pitch when you sent it. And I'd love to know, where did the idea for the story come from?
Probably from the same thing that caught your attention then, which were all those headlines. I think that the program of selling houses in what are often, if not outright abandoned villages, at least villages that are experiencing depopulation, selling them for €1 it's such a catchy headline, and it taps into so many people's fantasies about living abroad that every media outlet at some point had done some kind of story on that. I believe CNN was the first to pick it up. And then for years and years after that, you would see the same headline pop up: I bought a €1 house, or these are the people. There was a television show. There were 2 series about it, actually, one British, one American, about people who bought their €1 home. And so just the fantasy nature, of course, lured me in, but it was the question of what came next that seemed so interesting. What really happens afterwards, both for the people who buy the houses, but also for the neighbors in the villages.
Yeah, it's sort of the idea that it's so attractive because you're going for this community life and this way of life. And then the more people that buy these houses, and inevitably the fabric of that community changes, which I thought was a really interesting question for you to try and explore on your trip there. And one of the things you try and turn over in your story is the idea of welcoming. So how these smaller towns are responding to newcomers. I'm curious how it felt for you on the road going out and reporting this story and meeting all of these people.
The first town that I went to, which was actually the town that I based the whole story out of, I rented an apartment while I was there, was Sambuca di Sicilia. And I remember walking around my first afternoon there and the streets being very quiet, very few people out, but having the distinct impression that everybody who was out was watching me. There was a bank and I was going in to the ATM to get some money out, and I couldn't get the door to open. And so I'm like struggling with the door, and suddenly, like, there was no one around, and suddenly 3 people are there to help me. I was like, where did you guys come from? And I realized that I was kind of a surprising presence there at the time. So it was funny though, because I think my initial response to that, to feeling recognized as an outsider, was a sense of, wariness maybe, or that it wasn't entirely welcoming. But then I realized pretty quickly that was on me. It wasn't them. That was my imposing, I think, my fears more than what the actual sentiment toward me was. There was one cafe that I went to, and in the morning, there was an elderly man sitting in the corner just glaring at me. He glared at me as I went up to the counter and ordered, and glared at me as I sat back down. I was like, oh my gosh, am I in this guy's seat? What's going on? And finally, he came up to me and in very basic English asked me if I knew his cousins in New Jersey. And I realized that what I had mistaken for hostility was actually him just getting up the courage to ask me a question about his family.
I love that. That's so cute. How would you characterize the feelings of the people that you spoke with who had purchased the houses? Because in the story, you share a bit about some of the setbacks or delays or just things taking longer than expected. And if you could sum it up, I'm curious how you'd characterize the mood of these people that have gone over there and purchased houses as part of this dream.
I think for the ones that I met that were still in the process, there had been some disillusionment or at least education. Maybe that's a better way to put it. But there was still quite a bit of sort of determined excitement that for those who could see them taking shape, there was this sense of joy that they were getting to live this new life or to have made that fantasy come true. I did not meet a single person for whom the process had gone smoothly or even just as they had expected. I interviewed someone in a town called Mussomeli, someone named Danny McCubbin, who had, I think I describe him as like the poster child for €1 houses. And he had gone through the whole process. He had actually arrived not only with the desire to buy one of these homes, which for most people, one of the things I discovered is that most of the people buying them don't intend to live in them year round. They want to use them as vacation properties. But he was one of the few who came to live, and not just to live. He wanted to launch a program there. He had worked in the UK, actually with Jamie Oliver, in creating programs for people who didn't have access to sufficient food. And he had wanted to do the same thing in Mussomeli, only to discover that actually the people in Mussomeli didn't really need that kind of program. But during the pandemic, he instead started cooking and providing food for elderly people or people who are isolated and distributing it that way. And so he had really kind of carved a place for himself in the fabric of that town. And because of that, he had become also this kind of resource for anybody else who was thinking of buying one of these €1 houses. And I remember him telling me how he felt like so much of what he was doing was just crushing people's dreams, because he would tell them things like, the fact that you buy a house doesn't mean that you automatically get a residence permit. And if you don't have a residence permit, then you can't get a driver's license or buy a car. And because there's so many people who are buying these homes, there's actually a shortage of construction workers. So it will be years before anyone will even start on your house, let alone finish it. But for the people who kind of chilled out over all of that and were able to just be a little less uptight, let go of their expectations, accept the obstacles. And maybe this is the other sort of aspect of Sicilian culture that I encountered there. Then there was real joy and pleasure in the process. It just took them a while to get there.
You also write that one thing you found was that, yes, there has been some change, but that a distinctively Sicilian spirit still dominates. And so thinking about the destination specifically, what felt different to you about Sicily, about that feeling, about that spirit than other places that you've traveled to in Italy?
The places that I went to felt like very tight communities. And these are small enough towns where people really do know everybody else who lives in them. They run into each other on a daily basis as they do the shopping or take an evening walk. One of the questions I went with was, is that sense of connection and community going to be disturbed by all of these outsiders coming in? And from what I could tell at that point, it really hadn't happened. There were some like very, very mild points of friction where some of the Americans who had bought houses had gotten annoyed that the teenage boys in the town would roar through on their motorbikes at night because there was nothing else to do. But I also saw evidence. And the woman that I met that first night, who eventually got cut from the story, but whose name was Jennifer, she had become really good friends with people in the town, Sicilians themselves. And so she had felt accepted into that community, even though she still didn't really speak Italian. She hadn't been able to buy a car yet because she was having some residence issues, all kinds of things. But that core kind of communal element was there for her as well.
Love it. One of the things that we trimmed slightly from the story because of space was your personal interest in finding a home. So I want to make your dreams come true here and ask you, after all of this time, what would your dream home in Sicily look like? Would you be starting at €1 and put in 200,000, or would you be starting at 50? Where would it be? What would it look like?
Okay, well, it would not start at €1, that's for sure. One of the things you very quickly realize when you start looking at these is that you're lucky if €1 buys you 4 walls, and those 4 walls will be nowhere close to upright. So I was very amused that in Sambuca di Sicilia, after the runaway success of the €1 program, they then decided to double the price to €2. 1 or 2 years, you're basically buying the opportunity to tear something down and start over again. Maybe I just don't have enough imagination, but that wasn't very appealing to me. And one of the things I do describe in the story is on my last day there, going to see a house that was definitely more than €1, but it would have been considered quite cheap by any other standards. It might have been something like 50,000. It was a quite lovely 3-story building with incredible terraces and views of the surrounding area and beautiful chandeliers and tile floors. And it was in good enough shape that I could imagine the house that it would be. It also had a rental apartment with like a wood burning oven. I was like, I could open a pizza place here. Who knows? And it was in good enough shape that you could actually move into it. And by that point, I had become attached enough to this village that I could suddenly imagine myself making a life there, being part of that community, and having this beautiful light-filled Sicilian home overlooking a lake to live in. Yeah, a really fun story to do. And like I said, helped me fall in love with a part of Italy I'd never been to before.
Listener, thank you for tuning into this episode of Unpacked 5 Questions. In the show notes, you'll find a link to Lisa's story and to her social media handles. Join me in 2 weeks for another episode that takes you behind the scenes with our award-winning features writers. I'll be speaking with Peggy Orenstein, an author and a far contributing writer who traveled to Busan, South Korea, and came away with more love for the second cities of the world. Ready for more interviews with travel writers? Visit afar.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We are at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's exploration, I hope you'll come back for more great travel stories. Subscribing always makes that easy. And be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other travelers find it. This has been Unpacked, 5 Questions, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislinn Green, Nikki Galtaland, and Catherine LeGrave. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Culture Kids and the Explorers Podcast.